Picture this: you are standing on your porch, the morning air sharp with autumn's bite, when a woman in a crisp blazer hands you a fine for $. Her smile is thin, her eyes cold, and the paper trembles slightly in her grip, as if it knows the weight of the power it wields. You've done nothing but hunt on land you had permission to tread, yet here she stands, an emissary of a neighborhood machine that demands your obedience. In Green Valley Estates, where every lawn is trimmed to perfection and every mailbox painted to code, the HOA reigns supreme. But beneath its polished surface lies a deeper struggle, a clash of wills between those who enforce and those who resist, a battle as old as the land itself. This is the story of Mason Holloway, a man whose quiet defiance against an overreaching OA would uncover secrets, unravel egos, and redefine a community's soul. Mason Holloway, Senjabat, carried the weight of his past like a soldier's rucksack. 8 years in the military, 5 more in Seattle's tech grind, each step carving lines of resilience into his weathered face. He sought refuge in Green Valley, a suburb cradled against Washington's emerald woodlands, where modern homes sat on generous lots promising peace. But peace, as Steinbeck knew, is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the ambitions of those who mistake control for care. The HOA, led by Evelyn Richardson, a century-year-old lawyer with a smile as sharp as a blade, ruled with an iron hand disguised in velvet. Her bylaws were scripture, her meetings a court where dissent was quietly crushed. Mason, a software engineer working remotely, wanted only solitude and the rhythm of his weekend hunts, a ritual tying him to his Montana boyhood. The forest called to him, its silence a balm for a mind weary of noise. Evelyn, with her perfect bob and designer athleisure, was a study in ambition's shadow. She saw Green Valley as her canvas, each rule a brushstroke in her vision of order. To her, Mason's hunting was not just a violation but a personal affront, a crack in her meticulously crafted world. When she caught him kneeling beside a deer on what she called community trails, her outrage was primal, as if he'd defiled sacred ground. She didn't know the land belonged to Frank Williams, an 82-year-old retiree in Florida who'd granted Mason permission with a simple email: "Hunt if you like, son, just respect the land." Frank's words were a contract of trust, a relic of a world Evelyn couldn't fathom, where ownership meant more than possession. It meant stewardship. You, watching this, can feel the tension, can't you? The moment when Evelyn's voice rose, shrill and righteous, accusing Mason of murdering animals in a protected area. Picture yourself in his boots, the rifle still warm in your hands, the forest quiet but for her shouts. Would you bow to her fine, her threats, her vision of a community that suffocates under rules? Mason didn't. He stood, calm as the dawn, and began to dig. County records revealed the truth. Frank Spott's acres were his alone, untamed by HOA decrees. The trails, benches, and bird feeders Evelyn's group cherished were trespasses, built without consent. Worse, Mason uncovered plans for an Evelyn Richardson nature park, a monument to her ego, funded by residents' donations on land she didn't own. The HOA meeting was a crucible. Evelyn sat at the head, her allies, Marcus Bennett, the sycophantic vice president, and Jessica Parker, the zealous rule enforcer, flanking her like sentinels. Mason entered with a folder, his evidence a shield, Frank's email, his hunting license, the deed proving the land's true owner. "The HOA has no jurisdiction here," he said, his voice steady, cutting through Evelyn's narrative of community stewardship. She countered with talk of established use, of trails woven into Green Valley's identity, but her words rang hollow against the law's clarity. The room stirred, whispers of doubt threading through the crowd. Richard Cooper, the treasurer, frowned at the documents, sensing the ground shift beneath Evelyn's throne. "You know that feeling, don't you, when the powerful begin to falter, when their certainty cracks like thin ice?" Mason felt it too, standing there, a lone figure against a machine. But he wasn't alone for long. Sarah Johnson, the teacher 2 doors down, whispered warnings of Evelyn's campaign to paint him as a threat. Robert Jackson, a retired accountant, confessed the HOA's early knowledge of Frank's ownership, ignored to avoid complications. These were the first threads unraveling Evelyn's tapestry, revealing a pattern of deceit. White Mason's purchase of Frank's land for T-bite Wussers Ling was no impulse. It was a gauntlet thrown, a declaration that he would not be cowed. The deed in his hands was more than paper. It was power, raw and undeniable, rooted in the earth itself. Evelyn's response was swift, a campaign of petty fines, garbage cans, parking violations, meant to break him. Anonymous notes called him animal killer. Neighbors turned cold. Yet Mason moved with purpose, his attorney Amanda Lewis guiding him through legal waters. He found permit applications for the park, fundraising letters promising a legacy on stolen land. The audacity burned in him, not as anger but as resolve, the kind Steinbeck's men carried through dust and despair. You can see him now, can't you? Sitting late at night, poring over records, his quiet strength a beacon against the HOA's storm. This was no mere dispute over trails. It was a reckoning, a stand for the individual against the collective's overreach. The community watched, torn between loyalty to Evelyn's vision and the dawning truth of her oversteps. Mason's signs, private property, no trespassing, went up only to be torn down by Marcus and others, caught on trail cam. Each act of vandalism was a confession of their fear, their need to cling to a fiction. Evelyn's power, like all false idols, was built on sand, and Mason, with his deed and his truth, was the tide. The air in Green Valley grew thick with whispers, a restless hum beneath the manicured lawns and polished mailboxes. Mason Holloway, now the owner of the Botzer Acres the HOA had claimed as their own, stood at the edge of his land, watching the forest breathe. The trees, ancient and unyielding, seemed to nod in approval of his quiet rebellion. In their shade, he found a clarity that Evelyn Richardson, with her bylaws and her blazer, could never touch. She was a woman of ambition, but ambition unchecked is a vine that chokes the roots it feeds on. Evelyn's vision for Green Valley was a monument to herself, built on the labor of others and the land of a man who'd never known her name. Mason, with his Montana heart and soldier's grit, was dismantling that vision, not with fury, but with the steady hand of truth. You stand there with him, don't you? The damp earth under your boots, the weight of a deed in your pocket, the knowledge that you've turned the tables on those who thought you small. You feel the pulse of the fight, the kind that doesn't shout but simmers, patient as the seasons. Mason's fight was not just for his land, but for the principle that no one, not an HOA, not a self-styled queen, could claim what wasn't theirs. He moved through the days with purpose, his software engineer's precision applied to a different code. Now, the law, the records, the quiet alliances forming in the neighborhood's cracks. Evelyn's campaign against him intensified, a storm of petty grievances. Fines arrived for imagined infractions, grass too tall by an inch, a truck left in the driveway too long. Anonymous notes multiplied, slipped under his door like venomous snakes. Leave, Hunter. You don't belong. Neighbors who once nodded in passing now averted their eyes, as if Mason's defiance was contagious, a disease that might unravel their own compliance. But Sarah Johnson, the teacher with cookies and courage, remained steadfast, her whispers carrying warnings of Evelyn's private meetings, her plans to rally the community against the outsider. Sarah's loyalty was a small flame in the gathering dark, proof that not all had bowed to Evelyn's rule. Then came Robert Jackson, the retired accountant, his hands trembling as he sat in Mason's living room, confessing sins of omission from years past. Evelyn knew the land wasn't ours, he said, his voice low, as if the walls might betray him. She told us to ignore the owner, said. Adverse possession would make it ours in time. His words were a crack in the HOA's foundation, revealing not just overreach but intent, a deliberate trespass cloaked in community spirit. Robert hinted at darker truths. Funds for the nature park siphoned to Green Vision Consulting, a company owned by Evelyn's husband, Trevor Adams, and Marcus Bennett's sister, Patricia. The numbers didn't add up, and Robert's resignation from the board years ago had been his silent protest against a machine he couldn't stop. Mason's attorney, Amanda Lewis, pored over the documents with a hawk's eye, her sister years carrying the calm of someone who'd seen ambition's wreckage before. "This isn't just overreach," she said, her voice steady as she traced the paper trail. "It's fraud." They solicited donations for a park on land they knew they didn't own. The evidence piled up. Permit applications for the Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, glossy brochures promising a legacy, all built on a lie. Over Lusserbad Ling had flowed from residents' pockets to Trevor's company for consulting that no one could verify. Mason felt the weight of it, not as a burden but as a weapon, sharp and true. You know that feeling, don't you? When the pieces fall into place, when the fog lifts, and you see the path ahead clear as day. It's not triumph yet, but it's close, a spark in the chest that says you're no longer prey. The neighborhood churned with unease. Evelyn's allies, Marcus, Jessica, the loyalists who thrived on her approval, rallied to her defense, spreading tales of Mason's danger, jostling Mason's defiance, was a mirror held up to the community's soul, reflecting truths they'd rather, but not all were blind. Nancy Roberts, the HOA secretary, met Mason in secret, her fear palpable as she handed over a flash drive. "Evelyn controls everything," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "The money? It's not right. It goes to Trevor's company, no bids, no oversight." Her confession was a betrayal of Evelyn's empire, a crack in the loyalty she'd demanded. The flash drive held records, invoices, transfers, proof that the HOA's trail fund was a trough for Evelyn's inner circle. "You can see her, can't you?" Nancy, hunched in a coffee shop 2 towns over, glancing over her shoulder, her conscience heavier than her fear. She'd kept silent too long, cowed by Evelyn's threats. Her job at the school district dangled like a sword. But Mason's stand had stirred something in her, a flicker of courage to do right. The data she provided was dynamite. Lusserbad Ling funneled to Green Vision Consulting, invoices vague as fog, payments approved without scrutiny. It was a betrayal not just of Mason, but of every resident who'd trusted their dues were for the common good. Mason took the evidence to Detective Alex Morgan, a 30-year-old investigator whose calm demeanor hid a relentless hunger for justice. "This crosses lines," Morgan said, flipping through the files. "Wire fraud, misappropriation, serious charges." The law, like the land, was unyielding, and Mason had aligned himself with its truth. He installed signs around his property, private land, no trespassing, only to find them torn down by night. Marcus and others caught on trail cameras, their vandalism a desperate act of a crumbling regime. Evelyn's power was slipping, her narrative fraying like an old rope. Community began to whisper, not just of Mason's rebellion, but of their own doubts. Where had their money gone? Why had Evelyn never mentioned Frank Williams? The HOA meeting loomed, a battleground where Evelyn would make her stand. She entered the community center like a queen, her husband Trevor and Marcus at her side, their faces tight with the strain of holding a lie together. She spoke of community, of trails as a shared heritage, painting Mason as a selfish interloper. But the room was no longer hers alone. Residents stirred, their questions sharper now, their trust eroded. Mason stood, his voice a quiet thunder, laying out the truth. The land's true owner, the HOA's trespass, the park plans built on deception. The crowd murmured, a tide turning, and Evelyn's eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Though her voice held firm, accusing Mason of defamation, threatening lawsuits to silence him. You feel it, don't you? The moment when a community wakes, when the scales fall from their eyes. Mason wasn't just fighting for himself, but for them, for the principle that power must answer to truth. The meeting ended in chaos. But the seeds of change were sown. Evelyn's empire, built on control and charm, was cracking, and Mason, with his deed and his resolve, was the wedge driving it apart. The dawn broke over Green Valley Estates with a quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. Mason Holloway stood at his kitchen window, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the neighborhood stir. The signs on his land, private property, no trespassing, stood firm, though some bore scars from nocturnal vandals, their defiance captured on his trail. Mason was no stranger to battle, his military years carving a resilience that ran deeper than the roots of the forest he now owned. But this fight was different, not fought with rifles or code, but with truth, a weapon as sharp as any blade. Evelyn Richardson, with her polished exterior and iron will, had underestimated him, mistaking his quiet for weakness. She didn't know that in Mason's heart burned a fire, kindled in Montana's wilds, where land was more than property. It was a promise, a bond between man and earth. You can feel it, can't you? That pulse of defiance when the world expects you to bend, but you stand instead, rooted like an oak. You've known moments like this, where the weight of others' rules presses against your chest, daring you to push back. Mason felt it too, as he prepared for the next move in this quiet war. His attorney, Amanda Lewis, had become his shield, her legal mind slicing through the HOA's tangled lies. The evidence was mounting: financial records from Nancy Roberts, the timid secretary who'd found her courage, confessions from Robert Jackson, the old accountant haunted by his silence, and now trail camera footage of Marcus Bennett and his allies tearing down Mason's signs, their faces clear as day in the grainy light. Each piece was a brick in the wall Mason was building, not to shut out the community, but to expose the rot within its leadership. Evelyn's campaign grew desperate, her control slipping like sand through her fingers. She rallied her loyalists: Jessica Parker, with her zealous reports of minor infractions, Marcus, ever the obedient shadow, and her husband, Trevor Adams, whose company, Green Vision Consulting, had grown fat on HOA funds. They spread rumors, painting Mason as a threat to Green Valley's peace, a gun-toting outsider who cared nothing for their trails or their values. Social media buzzed with posts questioning his character, while anonymous notes multiplied on his doorstep, each one a small act of cowardice. But the neighborhood was no longer a monolith. Cracks appeared in Evelyn's facade as residents like John Peterson, a retired banker who donated WOB dollars, linked to the park fund, began asking pointed questions. Where had their money gone? Why had the HOA claimed land it didn't own? Mason moved with the precision of a man who'd learned to wait, to watch, to strike only when the moment was right. He met with Emily Chen, the Valley Chronicle reporter, whose pen was as sharp as Amanda's legal mind. Over coffee, he laid out the evidence: the Lusher Ling funneled to Trevor's company, the fundraising for a park on land the HOA never owned, the permit applications that bore Evelyn's name like a crown. Emily's eyes gleamed with the scent of a story that could shake Green Valley to its core. "This is bigger than a neighborhood spat," she said, her notebook filling with Mason's words. "This is fraud, plain and simple." Her article, set to publish online that evening, would be a spark in the dry grass of the community's discontent. You know that moment, don't you? When the truth, long buried, begins to surface, and the air grows heavy with the promise of change. Picture yourself at the edge of the crowd, watching Evelyn's empire teeter. The special HOA meeting she called was meant to be her fortress, a chance to rally the residents against Mason's defamatory attacks. She stood at the podium, her voice smooth as ever, framing the trails as Green Valley's heart, Mason as the villain who'd stolen them. Trevor unveiled renderings of the Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, a vision of paths and playgrounds that drew gasps from the crowd. But the gasps weren't all of awe. Some were of outrage, as residents realized the land was never theirs to claim. Mason stood, his presence a quiet challenge, and spoke of Frank Williams, the true owner, and the HOA's years of trespass. He held up the deed, his name now on it, and the room stirred, a murmur of doubt growing into a roar. Nancy Roberts, the secretary, broke her silence, her voice trembling but clear. "Evelyn knew the land wasn't ours," she said, her words cutting through the chaos. "She threatened my job when I asked about the payments to Trevor's company." The room erupted, residents shouting questions about their donations, their trust betrayed. Richard Cooper, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably, his loyalty to Evelyn fraying. Even Marcus, her staunchest ally, faltered, his nods less certain. Then District Attorney William Hayes entered, flanked by Detective Morgan, their presence a silent thunder. "This is now a matter of investigation," Hayes said, his voice calm but unyielding. Evelyn's face paled, her composure cracking like porcelain dropped on stone. "You feel the shift, don't you? The moment when power, once absolute, begins to crumble." Evelyn's threats, of lawsuits, of liens, rang hollow now, her authority a shadow in the face of the law. She stormed out, Trevor and Marcus trailing like scolded children, while the crowd buzzed with questions and anger. Mason remained, answering residents' queries with a calm that belied the storm he'd unleashed. Sarah Johnson, ever loyal, gave him a nod, her phone capturing the chaos for posterity. Emily Chen scribbled furiously, her story already taking shape. The community was waking, its heart stirred by the truth Mason had laid bare. That night, a text from an unknown number lit up Mason's phone. "Storage Unit Arsursan, Valley Self-Storage. Documents being moved tonight." It was the break he needed. He called Detective Morgan, who acted swiftly, intercepting Trevor and Patricia Bennett as they tried to destroy evidence, boxes of financial records that would seal their fate. The HOA's house of cards was collapsing, and Mason, with his deed and his truth, stood at the center, unyielding as the land he now owned. The sun rose over Green Valley Estates with a clarity that seemed to mock the turmoil beneath its tidy roofs. Mason Holloway stood at the edge of his bought acres, the deed in his pocket, a quiet testament to his resolve. The forest stretched before him, its trees whispering secrets older than the HOA's bylaws, secrets of endurance and truth. Mason was no stranger to standing alone. His years in the military had taught him the weight of solitary conviction, the strength it took to face a machine and not flinch. Evelyn Richardson's empire, built on charm and control, was crumbling, but like a wounded beast, she was at her most dangerous. Her latest move, a trail preservation walk to trespass en masse on Mason's land, was a desperate bid to reclaim her narrative, to paint him as the villain stealing the community's heart. But Mason, with his soldier's instincts and coder's precision, was ready. "You can see it, can't you?" The line in the sand, the moment when you choose to stand or yield. You felt it in your own life, that pulse of defiance when the world demands you bend. Picture yourself at the gate of Mason's land, the morning mist curling around your boots, the air heavy with the promise of confrontation. Evelyn arrived with her entourage, sensor strong, their signs proclaiming "Trails for all" and "Save our nature." She wore pristine hiking gear, a prop as calculated as her smile, her voice ringing out for the cameras she'd invited. "This land is ours by right of use," she declared, her words a challenge to Mason's deed. But the gate, sturdy and legal, bore signs of the land's new status, a private wildlife reserve, its permits filed, its boundaries clear. Detective Alex Morgan and 3 deputies arrived as Evelyn's crowd pressed forward, their presence a silent rebuke. "This is private property," Morgan said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Crossing this line risks arrest." Evelyn hesitated, her bravado faltering as Marcus Bennett, her loyal shadow, stepped back, unwilling to face handcuffs. The crowd thinned, residents muttering as they retreated to their cars, their signs drooping like wilted flowers. Evelyn's cry, "You're all giving up after everything I've done," echoed with a bitter truth. Everything she'd done was now her undoing, the leisure bod Ling funneled to her husband's company, the park plans built on lies, the threats to silence dissent. Her glare at Mason, venomous and hollow, promised retribution, but her power was spent. The community reeled in the aftermath. Emily Chen's article in the Valley Chronicle hit like a thunderclap, detailing the HOA's fraud, the misused funds, the land they'd never owned. Residents like John Peterson, who'd poured thousands into the park fund, demanded answers, their trust shattered. Nancy Roberts, the secretary who'd risked her job to expose Evelyn, became a quiet hero, her flash drive of financial records the key to Detective Morgan's case. The storage unit raid, tipped off by an anonymous text, yielded boxes of documents, proof of Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett's complicity in siphoning HOA funds. The DA charged them with fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of funds. The numbers stark. Ling diverted much of it to Evelyn's husband for consulting that never materialized. You know that feeling, don't you? When the truth, once a whisper, becomes a roar, shaking the foundations of those who thought themselves untouchable. Mason felt it as he walked his land, the forest a silent ally in its fight. He'd turned Evelyn's game against her, not with anger, but with the quiet force of right. Sarah Johnson, the teacher who'd stood by him, took the helm as interim HOA president after an emergency vote disbanded the old board. Her first act was an audit, a cleansing of the books that revealed the depth of Evelyn's betrayal. Richard Cooper, the treasurer, resigned, admitting he'd signed off on payments without question, cowed by Evelyn's authority. The community, once a machine of compliance, began to breathe again, its heart stirred by the possibility of fairness. Mason kept his promise. He carved out a portion of his land for a public trail, named the Frank Williams Memorial Trail, after the man who'd trusted him with its care. The trail was legal, insured, and marked with a plaque telling Frank's story, a farmer's son who'd loved the land, not exploited it. The contrast to Evelyn's vanity project was stark, a reminder that true community grows from respect, not control. The Tidishawal Ling Evelyn and her allies repaid became a scholarship fund for ethics and leadership, a quiet jab at the woman who'd valued neither. Evelyn, Trevor, and Patricia took plea deals, probation, restitution, a decade-long ban from managing HOAs or nonprofits. They sold their home and left Green Valley, their reputations in tatters, their legacy a cautionary tale. Mason watched their departure from his porch, not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd held his ground. The neighborhood was changing, its people waking to the power of their own voices. Sarah's HOA meetings were no longer courts but conversations, where ideas, not rules, took root. You stand with Mason now, don't you? The forest at your back, the community before you, no longer a cage but a canvas. You see the cost of standing tall, the loneliness of the fight, but also the freedom it brings. Mason's victory was not just the land, but the truth it carried, that no one, no matter how powerful, can claim what isn't theirs. The community learned this, too, finding in their loss a new strength, a new honesty. The autumn leaves fell slow and deliberate over Green Valley estates, each one a quiet marker of time's passage, of a community shedding its old skin. Mason Holloway walked the Frank Williams Memorial Trail, his boots crunching on the gravel path he'd built with care, the forest whispering its approval. The trail was more than a gift to the neighborhood. It was a testament to what could be when truth, not ambition, led the way. Mason, at Sendrabad, carried a quiet strength, his military years and tech grind, forging a man who valued land not for what it could yield but for what it could teach. Resilience, patience, the unyielding power of what is right. The HOA, once a machine that ground dissent to dust, was now a shadow of itself, its new leaders learning to listen rather than command. But the scars of Evelyn Richardson's reign lingered, like the faint outline of a fence long torn down. You walk with him, don't you? The cool air brushing your face, the trail stretching ahead, a path born of one man's refusal to bow. You know the weight of such choices, the way they carve lines into your soul, lines of pride and pain. Mason's fight had stirred something in Green Valley, a ripple that touched every home, every heart. Sarah Johnson, now steering the HOA with a teacher's gentle firmness, held meetings where voices, not rules, filled the room. Residents like John Peterson, who'd lost thousands to Evelyn's park fund, spoke of trust betrayed but also of hope reborn. The audit Sarah ordered laid bare the HOA's sins. Loser Bod, Ling Siphon to Trevor Adams Green Vision Consulting, invoices for work never done, all approved by a board too cowed to question. The truth was a bitter medicine, but it cleansed. Evelyn's fall was complete, her plea deal a public confession of guilt. She, Trevor, and Patricia Bennett repaid E-Bite Ling, their lives upended, their names synonymous with betrayal. They'd fled Green Valley, their house sold to a young couple who knew nothing of the drama that had unfolded. Yet Evelyn's shadow lingered in the cautious glances of neighbors, in the hesitation before they spoke at meetings, as if her ghost might still wield a rule book. Mason saw it, felt it, but he didn't dwell. His fight had never been for vengeance, but for clarity, for the land and the principle it held. The scholarship fund, seeded with Evelyn's restitution, was his quiet triumph. A legacy not of ego but of ethics, a reminder that power without integrity is a house built on sand. You feel it too, don't you? That quiet victory when the storm passes, leaving not just wreckage but possibility. Picture yourself at the trail's entrance, reading the plaque about Frank Williams, the man who'd trusted Mason with his land. Frank, now gone, had died in Florida shortly after the sale, his heart eased by knowing his acres were in hands that respected them. The trail was his memorial, but also Green Valley's, a symbol of what could rise when lies fell. Residents walked it now, not as trespassers but as guests, their children laughing, their steps light with the knowledge that this was a gift, not a right. The community was healing, but healing is slow, like the growth of a tree after a fire. Nancy Roberts, the secretary who'd risked everything to expose Evelyn, found peace in her quiet courage, her job secure now that Evelyn's influence had vanished. Richard Cooper, the treasurer, moved away, his resignation a silent apology for his blindness. Marcus Bennett, Evelyn's yes-man, stayed but kept to himself, his bravado gone, his sister Patricia's disgrace a weight he couldn't shake. Jessica Parker, the rule enforcer, softened, her zeal for bylaws replaced by a tentative kindness, as if she too had seen the cost of blind loyalty. Mason's life settled into a new rhythm. He hunted still, his rifle a link to his Montana roots. But now, with neighbors' blessings, their fears of danger dispelled by his openness. He worked from home, his software code a world of logic and order, a contrast to the chaos he'd navigated. Sarah stopped by with cookies, her smile a reminder that community could be warm, not suffocating. Emily Chen, the reporter, wrote a follow-up story, not of scandal but of renewal, the trails opening a quiet celebration of Green Valley's rebirth. The Valley Chronicle's pages carried a different tone now, less about rules and more about people, their struggles and their triumph. You stand at the edge of this new Green Valley, don't you? The forest at your back, the neighborhood before you, no longer a battlefield but a place of possibility. You see Mason's solitude, not as loneliness but as strength, the kind that comes from knowing your worth. He didn't chase applause or validation. He sought only the truth, and in finding it, he freed others to seek theirs. The HOA, under Sarah, signed an access agreement for the trail, its terms fair, its spirit collaborative. The community learned to value what they had, not what they could claim, a lesson carved into the land itself. The ripples of Mason's stand reached beyond Green Valley. Other neighborhoods whispered of his fight, of an HOA brought to its knees by one man's resolve. The story spread, not as gossip but as a parable, a reminder that power, unchecked, breeds its own downfall. Mason didn't seek fame, but it found him in quiet ways. A nod from a stranger, a letter from a nearby resident facing their own HOA's overreach. He answered each with the same calm, offering not advice but perspective. The law is a tool, but courage is the hand that wields it. You know this truth, don't you? That freedom comes not from winning, but from standing, from choosing the harder path because it's right. Mason's victory was the land, yes, but also the community it awakened, the hearts it stirred to question, to care. The Frank Williams Memorial Trail was his legacy, but so was the scholarship fund, the new HOA, the neighbors who now greeted him not with fear, but with respect. Green Valley was no longer Evelyn's canvas, but a shared tapestry, woven with threads of trust and truth. The winter crept into Green Valley Estates with a soft insistence, dusting the Frank Williams Memorial Trail with frost that glittered under the pale sun. Mason Holloway walked the path, his breath clouding in the chill, his eyes tracing the lines of the forest that had become both his refuge and his battleground. At Saint-Gervais, he carried a quiet wisdom, the kind forged in the crucible of conflict, tempered by the solitude of his Montana roots and the discipline of his military years. The trail was a living testament to his stand, its gravel crunching underfoot a reminder that truth, once unearthed, could reshape the world around it. Green Valley was no longer the stifled suburb of Evelyn Richardson's reign. It was a community finding its voice, its heart, its purpose. Yet Mason knew that change, like the seasons, was never final. Its roots needed tending, growth a labor of care. You walk beside him, don't you? The cold air sharp against your skin, the trail stretching into the woods, each step a quiet victory over those who'd sought to silence you. You've known this path in your own life, the one less traveled, where the cost of standing tall is measured in sleepless nights and sidelong glances, but the reward is a freedom no one can take. Mason's fight had been for the land, yes, but also for the principle that no one, not an HOA, not a woman with a rule book, could claim what wasn't theirs. The community felt it, too, their wounds healing under Sarah Johnson's steady hand, their meetings now a chorus of voices rather than a single, commanding note. Sarah, with her teacher's patience and neighbors' warmth, had transformed the HOA into something human. The audit she'd ordered was complete, its findings a stark map of Evelyn's betrayal, Luscherbaz, Ling diverted to Green Vision Consulting, Trevor Adams' company, for work that existed only on paper. The restitution, Ebite, Ling from Evelyn, Trevor, and Patricia Bennett, had been a bitter pill for them, but a balm for Green Valley. The scholarship fund, seeded with teaser-warleen of that money, was already bearing fruit. Its first recipients, young students studying ethics, their essays echoing Mason's stand without ever naming him. The rest rebuilt the HOA's coffers, ensuring transparency with new rules that Sarah enforced with a quiet firmness. Residents like John Peterson, once burned by their trust in Evelyn, now attended meetings, their questions sharp but hopeful, their faith in community reborn. Evelyn's absence was a void, but not an empty one. Her house, now home to a young couple with a toddler, stood as a quiet rebuke unto her legacy. She, Trevor, and Patricia had fled to a city apartment, their plea deals sparing them jail but not shame. Their ban from managing HOAs or nonprofits was a permanent mark, a reminder that power misused carries a price. Yet their departure didn't erase the lessons they'd left behind. Neighbors spoke of Evelyn with a mix of pity and anger. Her name a cautionary tale whispered at barbecues and book clubs. Marcus Bennett, her former ally, stayed in Green Valley, his silence a kind of penance, his sister Patricia's disgrace a shadow he couldn't outrun. Jessica Parker, once the HOA's watchdog, now volunteered at the trail's maintenance days, her hands in the dirt, a quiet apology for her zeal. You see it, don't you? The way a community knits itself back together, not with grand gestures but with small acts of care. Picture yourself at the trail's opening, months ago, when children ran ahead, their laughter echoing, while parents nodded to Mason, their thanks unspoken but clear. The plaque at the entrance, honoring Frank Williams, told a story of a man who'd loved his land, not for profit but for its soul. Frank's death, shortly after selling to Mason, had been a quiet passing, his heart eased by knowing his acres were safe. The trail was his legacy, but also Green Valley's, a path where families walked not as conquerors but as stewards, their steps light with gratitude. Mason's life had settled into a rhythm that suited him. He hunted still, his rifle a tether to his past, but now with neighbors who understood, their fears dispelled by his openness. His software work filled his days, its logic a counterpoint to the chaos he'd faced. Sarah's cookies arrived weekly, her visits a reminder that community could be a warmth, not a weight. Emily Chen's follow-up article in the Valley Chronicle had shifted from scandal to hope, the trail's story a beacon for other neighborhoods fighting their own battles. Mason received letters, some from strangers, asking how he'd done it, how he'd stood against an HOA's might. He answered each, not with pride but with perspective. Courage is a choice, and truth is its fuel. You know this truth, don't you? That standing tall doesn't mean standing alone, that one man's fight can stir 100 hearts. Mason's victory was the land, the trail, the scholarship, but also the community it awakened. Green Valley was no longer Evelyn's fiefdom, but a tapestry of voices, each thread a story of doubt, betrayal, and redemption. The trail's access agreement, signed under Sarah's watch, was a contract of trust, its terms fair, its spirit collaborative. Residents maintained it, their hands clearing brush, their children planting wildflowers, their pride in the work a quiet echo of Mason's stand. The ripples of his fight spread beyond Green Valley, carried by whispers and news, a parable for those who felt crushed by rules not their own. Mason didn't seek this role, but he bore it with the same calm he'd brought to the fight. His solitude was not loneliness but a choice, a space where he could hear the forest's voice, the land's heartbeat. The community, too, found its own solitude, a detachment from the need to control, a peace in shared purpose. The spring sun spilled over Green Valley estates, bathing the Frank Williams Memorial Trail in light that hummed with renewal. Mason Holloway Sengerbot walked the path, boots whispering on gravel laid with care. The forest, an old friend, wove sunlight into golden veins, each pulsing with his stand's story. Military years forged resilience, tech work precision, but Montana roots gave him heart to face Evelyn Richardson's empire. The HOA, once a machine, now lived under Sarah Johnson's hand, building, not binding. Mason's victory was the bot shrakers and the truth that freed Green Valley. You walk this trail, don't you? Air fresh with leaves, woods whispering resilience. You've known battles, silence demanded, but voice raised. Mason's rebellion, a deed, a trail, echoed, stirring Green Valley's hearts. Sarah's HOA became voices, not rules. The audit exposed Lizarbod, Ling Siffin to Trevor Adams' Green Vision Consulting. Invoices vague, board cowed. Restitution, e-bite Ling from Evelyn, Trevor, Patricia, was a balm funding a scholarship for ethics, rebuilding trust. Evelyn's fall, a quiet earthquake, left her house alive with a new family's laughter. Her plea deal confessed fraud. Her ban from HOAs was a forged chain. Marcus lingered in exile. Jessica Parker tended wildflowers, hands penitent. You see it, don't you? Healing in small acts, children planting, neighbors clearing brush. The trail's plaque honored Frank Williams, who died trusting Mason. Residents walked as guests, steps light with gratitude. Mason hunted, rifle tying him to boyhood. Neighbors now understanding. Sarah's cookies warmed his days. Emily Chen's articles shifted to renewal. Letters asked his secret. He answered, courage chooses, truth fuels. You know this, don't you? Freedom's quiet, not victory's noise. The trail's agreement, fair and collaborative, bound residents in trust. Ripples spread, a parable for the crushed. Mason's solitude was strength, his fight for truth, not glory. The woman, the boy, the man, the soldier, who knows their worth, does not chase money, fame, or choices. The summer sun hung low over Green Valley estates, its light weaving a tapestry of gold across the Frank Williams Memorial Trail, where the forest stood as both witness and ally to Mason Holloway's quiet rebellion. At Centurbod, Mason walked the path with the soldier's steady gait, his eyes tracing the lines of a land he'd fought for, not with fists but with truth, a weapon sharper than any blade. His military years had carved resilience into his bones. His tech work honed a mind for precision, but it was his Montana heart that gave him the courage to face Evelyn Richardson's empire and not flinch. The HOA, once a machine of control, now breathed with life under Sarah Johnson's care. Its people no longer subjects but neighbors, their voices weaving a new story of trust. Mason's victory was the land, yes, but also the truth it carried. A truth that freed Green Valley from the chains of deceit and showed what a community could be when rooted in respect, not rule. You stand at the trail's edge, don't you? The air warm with summer's promise, the path stretching into the woods, each step a reminder of battles you've faced where the world demanded your silence. But you spoke. Mason's story is not just his own but yours, a mirror held up to the struggles of modern life. Work's relentless grind, the quest for balance, the pursuit of dreams against a tide of rules. His fight against the HOA was a parable, rich with lessons that linger like the scent of pine. It taught that resilience, born of truth, can topple even the mightiest facades, that power, unchecked, sows its own ruin, and that community, when true, is a tapestry of shared care, not a cage of control. These truths, etched into the gravel of the trail, speak to the heart of those who navigate today's world, amidst chaos. Mason's resilience was a quiet fire, kindled in Montana's wilds, where land was a promise between man and earth. When Evelyn slapped a $1 fine on his door for hunting on Frank Williams' land, he didn't bow. He dug, unearthing the HOA's trespass, their plans for a park named after Evelyn, built on lies and residents' money. His purchase of the Bosher Acres was no mere act of defiance but a stand for justice, a declaration that no one, not a rule book, not a self-crowned queen, could claim what wasn't theirs. You felt that fire, haven't you? The spark that ignites when you face a system that expects your surrender, but you choose to stand, armed with truth. Mason's victory reminds us that in our own battles, against bosses, bureaucracies, or the weight of conformity, truth is the sturdiest shield, resilience the sword that carves a path forward. Evelyn, with her perfect bob and steely gaze, was power's shadow, a figure Steinbeck might have painted with pity and critique. She wasn't evil but human, twisted by a belief that her vision justified any means, trespassing on Frank's land, siphoning l'auberge, linked to her husband's company, threatening dissenters like Nancy Roberts. Her fall, sealed by a plea deal and Ling repaid, was a warning power without responsibility crumbles. Yet Sarah, with her teacher's warmth, showed another way, leading the HOA not to dominate but to unite. You see the contrast, don't you? The leader who rules versus the one who serves. This lesson speaks to our world, where workplaces, families, and communities falter under control but thrive under care, urging us to wield influence with humility, not hubris. Community, under Evelyn, was a mirage, its unity a mask for fear. Mason's Trail, named for Frank, was a gift, a legal path built with respect, inviting neighbors to walk not as conquerors, but as stewards. The scholarship fund, seeded with Evelyn's restitution, sent students to study ethics, a quiet jab at her betrayal. Green Valley's rebirth, under Sarah's hand, was proof that community grows from trust, not tyranny. You know this truth, don't you? The warmth of a place where voices matter, where shared work binds hearts. In our fragmented lives, torn by ambition and distraction, Mason's story calls us to build communities that lift, not crush, to find strength in shared purpose. Mason's freedom was not just the land, but a deeper liberation, a detachment from the need for applause. He fought for truth, not glory. His solitude a strength, not a burden. His peace, standing on the trail, was the kind Steinbeck's heroes found in the land's quiet voice. A peace that comes from knowing your worth. You've sought that peace, haven't you? The freedom to be yourself, unswayed by likes or nods. This final lesson is a beacon for our age, where social media and expectations clamor for conformity. Mason reminds us that true worth lies in integrity, in living by values that endure beyond the crowd's fleeting gaze. From every angle, the story offers wisdom. Evelyn's fall invites compassion, her ambition a human flaw, not a monster's. Nancy and Sarah, ordinary yet brave, show that change needs only courage, not capes. Mason, the soldier turned steward, proves that one voice can stir 100 hearts. His trail, his truth, his stand are a call to us all. To face our battles with resilience, to lead with care, to build communities of trust, and to find freedom in our own worth. Green Valley, once a cage, is now a canvas, its people painting a future where truth and respect reign. The woman, the boy, the man, the soldier, who knows their worth, does not chase money, fame, or choices.